You'll have to wait. I don't have time for every complaint. People like you exaggerate everything. The patient winces, holding his side, ignored as others are treated first. She thought he was just another face, another problem to brush aside. But minutes later, in the very same hospital, she'd discover the truth. The man she dismissed wasn't just a patient. He was the new head surgeon, and her world was about to change. The emergency room was alive with noise, phones ringing, monitors beeping, footsteps echoing across the polished floor. But in the corner, a man sat doubled over in pain. Dr. Malcolm Hayes, not the head surgeon yet, not a man of power or titles in this moment, just a patient, a man in need. His hand pressed against his side. His breaths came short, uneven. Every minute felt heavier, like a weight he could not carry much longer. He had checked in at the front desk, given his name, explained his symptoms, and then he waited. The waiting room was half full, some scrolling their phones, some whispering anxiously, some already glaring at the clock. Malcolm tried to stay calm. He had been on the other side before, the doctor moving quickly, choosing who to see next. He knew triage. But still, the pain was sharp, and it was growing worse. Then came the voice. Sharp, cold, uncaring. "Mr. Hayes," Nurse Karen Whitfield said, stepping into the room. Her eyes flicked toward him, then away just as quickly. Her clipboard hugged tight to her chest. "You'll need to wait. We're busy tonight. Other patients need attention first." Malcolm lifted his head, sweat beading at his temple. "I understand," he said softly, "but this pain, it's not normal. Something's wrong, please." Karen's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You people always think it's urgent. Trust me, you'll live. Sit tight." Her voice wasn't loud. But in that waiting room, every word felt like a spotlight. A mother glanced up from her phone. A man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. The dismissal hung in the air like smoke. Malcolm swallowed hard. His pride stung more than the pain in his side. But he lowered his gaze and said nothing. He had learned, long ago, that arguing could make things worse. Minutes passed, then half an hour, then an hour. Patients came and went. One man walked in holding nothing more than a sprained wrist. He was taken back within 10 minutes. Another woman complained of mild dizziness. She too was escorted past the doors. And still, Malcolm waited. Every throb in his side reminded him of the cost of silence. Every glance from the staff reminded him of his place. He leaned back in the chair, clutching his side tighter. Memories flashed. His father, years ago, sitting in a waiting room not unlike this one, complaining of chest pains, told to wait, told it wasn't serious. By the time anyone listened, it had been too late. Malcolm shut his eyes. Not again. Not this time. He stood slowly, his legs trembling, and approached the desk. Nurse Karen was there, flipping through forms. Her eyes met his irritation before he even spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice strained but steady. "I can't keep waiting." "Please. The pain is getting worse. I need to be seen." Karen exhaled sharply, tapping her pen against the counter. "You're not the only one in pain. Sit down. If you collapse, we'll put you on the list faster. Until then," she waved her hand dismissively, "wait like everyone else." The words cut deeper than the pain in his side. For a moment, Malcolm considered shouting, considered demanding to be treated with the dignity every patient deserved. But instead, he nodded. Quiet, controlled. He turned back to his seat, each step heavier than the last. The humiliation clung to him, wrapping around his chest like a second weight. The whispers in the waiting room weren't loud, but he felt them. Felt the judgment. felt the label she had thrown on him without even saying it aloud. Exaggerator. Problem. Less than. He sat down again. Silent, breathing through the fire in his chest. And though the pain in his body burned, the memory of her words burned even hotter. Because this wasn't just neglect, it was a dismissal, it was contempt, it was biased, plain as day. And in that moment, Malcolm Hayes made a quiet promise to himself. If he lived through this, if he rose high enough, he would make sure no patient ever felt this way again. No one would be dismissed. No one would be treated as if their pain was imaginary. No one would be invisible. Not under his watch. The sound of the intercom broke his thoughts. "Staff, please report to conference room B for a mandatory meeting." Nurse Karen scribbled something onto her clipboard, glanced once more at Malcolm, then walked briskly down the hall. Malcolm sat there, still clutching his side, breathing steady, pain surging. But inside, a storm was building. She thought he was just another patient, just another complaint to ignore. What she didn't know was that in just a few minutes, the balance of power in this hospital was about to shift forever. The waiting room door swung shut behind Nurse Karen Whitfield. Malcolm exhaled slowly, fighting back the pain that threatened to pull him under. The intercom still echoed in his ears. "Staff, please report to conference room B for a mandatory meeting." For a moment, he considered leaving. The sting of humiliation still burned in his chest. But he stayed seated, steadying his breath. Because he knew something no one else in that room knew. In just a few minutes, he would no longer be a patient. He would be something more. The doors down the hall opened. Staff in scrubs and lab coats filed into the conference room. Karen walked among them, clipboard in hand, her stride brisk, her expression unreadable. She slid into a seat, crossing one leg over the other. Her tone from earlier lingered in her posture, cold, dismissive, confident in her authority. At the head of the room, a woman stepped forward. Dr. Evelyn Grant, Chief Administrator, respected, unflinching, her voice carried weight even before she spoke. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for gathering on such short notice. We have an important announcement." The room quieted. Nurses straightened in their chairs. Doctors folded their arms. Even Karen leaned forward slightly, her pen poised above her notepad. Dr. Grant continued. "As you all know, the hospital board has been in search of a new head surgeon. Someone not only skilled in medicine, but also in leadership. Someone with a vision to improve patient care, to raise standards, and to remind us why we are here." Karen's eyes flickered. She had heard whispers about this position, rumors that it would be someone from outside the hospital. She was curious now, scribbling quickly across her page. Dr. Grant's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Tonight, it is my honor to introduce you to the person who will be leading our surgical department from this day forward." The double doors at the back of the conference room opened, and in walked Dr. Malcolm Hayes. No longer hunched in pain, no longer just a patient waiting silently in the corner. Now he stood tall, his posture commanding, his gaze steady. His tailored suit replaced the vulnerability of the waiting room chair. Every step he took toward the front of the room carried weight. Karen's pen froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes widened as recognition struck. The same man she had dismissed, ignored, humiliated, now walked past her, his presence undeniable. Dr. Grant's voice rose again. "Please welcome Dr. Malcolm Hayes, our new head surgeon." The room erupted into polite applause. Some clapped with genuine enthusiasm, others nodded respectfully, whispering to one another. But Karen sat frozen, her hands trembling slightly against her notepad. Her mind raced. Her heart pounded. Malcolm turned to face the staff, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp, unwavering. "Thank you, Dr. Grant," he began, "and thank you, all of you, for being here tonight. I don't take this responsibility lightly." His voice was smooth, measured, the voice of someone who had carried both pain and purpose. "I became a doctor because I believe every life matters. Every patient deserves to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity. Too often that doesn't happen. Too often biases cloud judgment, and too often those biases cost lives." Karen's pulse quickened. The words cut close, uncomfortably close. Malcolm's eyes swept across the room, and for the briefest moment, they locked on hers. Not long enough to call her out, not yet, but long enough to remind her that he remembered. Long enough to remind her that silence does not erase actions. He continued, "In this hospital, that will change. Together we will create a standard of care that leaves no one dismissed, no one ignored, and no one left to suffer in silence." A murmur rippled through the room. Some staff nodded firmly, others exchanged glances. The weight of his words settled like stone. Karen shifted in her seat, suddenly very aware of her hands, her posture, her breath. The man she had brushed aside as if he were invisible now stood as her superior, her boss, her authority, and the storm that had been quietly building in the waiting room had just stepped into her world. The conference room was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that doesn't just mean people are listening, it means they're measuring, weighing every word, feeling the shift in the air. Dr. Malcolm Hayes stood tall at the front, his presence filling the space without effort. The applause had faded, but its echo lingered, mingling with the tension that clung to every wall. He let the silence breathe before speaking again. "I want to be very clear," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "This role isn't about me. It's about the patients we serve, about holding ourselves accountable to the oath we all took." His words rolled through the room, calm yet sharp, each one finding its mark. Karen sat stiff in her chair, her notepad untouched now. Her pen rested between her fingers, but her hand wouldn't move. She couldn't move, because every syllable felt directed at her, though his gaze scanned the entire room. He went on. "Too many times I've seen patients overlooked, ignored, written off because of where they come from, how they look, or the assumptions we make about them." A murmur shifted through the staff. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances. One doctor folded his arms tighter across his chest. But Malcolm didn't waver. He took a step closer to the rows of chairs, his eyes steady, his tone calm but firm. "That stops now. Here, in this hospital." Under my watch, Karen's throat tightened. Her mind replayed the waiting room, his quiet voice asking for help, her sharp reply, her dismissal, her words. "People like you, always exaggerating." And now, here he was, not a patient to be brushed aside, but her boss, her authority. She swallowed hard, the sound loud in her own ears. Malcolm scanned the room again, and once more his eyes met hers. Only this time, he didn't look away quickly. He let the moment hang. Heavy, pointed. Karen's breath caught in her chest. He didn't name her. He didn't have to. Everyone in the room felt the weight of that pause. And in that pause, Karen felt the walls of her certainty crumble. Finally, Malcolm turned back toward Dr. Grant. "Thank you again for trusting me with this responsibility," he said. "I won't take it lightly. And I expect no one else in this room will either." The administrator gave a firm nod. Thank you, Dr. Hayes. I believe I speak for everyone when I say we're honored to have you leading us. There was a smattering of applause again, softer this time, tinged with unease. And then, the meeting adjourned. Chairs scraped against the floor, lab coats rustled, staff filed out, whispering in low tones. Karen remained seated for a moment, frozen in place. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a drum. Her palms were slick with sweat. Finally, she stood, smoothing her uniform with trembling hands. She tried to steady her breath, to compose herself, to blend into the crowd leaving the room. But as she reached the door, a voice stopped her. "Miss Whitfield." She froze. Slowly, she turned. Dr. Hayes stood a few feet away, his gaze fixed firmly on her. Not hostile, not cruel, but unflinching. "Yes, Dr. Hayes," she managed, her voice thinner than she intended. He studied her for a moment, as though weighing something invisible. Then he spoke. "I'd like to see you in my office tomorrow morning." "First thing." Her breath hitched, her hands tightened around the clipboard she carried. "Yes, doctor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, they simply looked at one another. Her eyes flickered with unease, his with quiet strength. Then he turned away, already moving towards the hallway, already focused on the work ahead. Karen exhaled shakily, her entire body trembling. The reality pressed down on her like a weight she could no longer ignore. The man she had dismissed as nothing more than another patient was now the one person who held her career, her future, in his hands. And tomorrow, that reckoning will begin. The night was long. Karen Whitfield barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. Dr. Malcolm Hayes, the patient she had brushed aside, the man who now sat at the very top of the hospital she thought she owned a piece of. Her alarm rang before dawn, but she was already awake. She dressed in silence, her uniform pressed but her nerves frayed. In the mirror she tried to steady herself, but the reflection staring back at her didn't look like the confident nurse she once believed herself to be. By the time she reached the hospital, the hallways buzzed with the usual morning rush. Stretchers wheeled past, monitors beeped, voices echoed in clipped urgency. But to Karen, every sound was distant, muffled, drowned out by the thought of what awaited her. She walked the corridor to the new head surgeon's office. Each step felt heavier, her palms clammy against the clipboard she clutched like a shield. Finally, she reached the door. It stood half open, his name already engraved in the plaque, Dr. Malcolm Hayes, head of surgery. She knocked lightly. A voice answered. "Come in." She stepped inside. The office was simple but commanding. Bookshelves lined the walls. A large desk sat near the window, sunlight spilling across neatly stacked files. And behind it, Malcolm Hayes. He didn't rise at first. He simply looked at her. Calm. Measured. Unshaken. "Ms. Whitfield," he said, "please, sit." Her legs felt wooden as she lowered herself into the chair across from him. She tried to smile, but it faltered quickly under the weight of his steady gaze. For a moment, he let the silence stretch. Not cruelly, not theatrically, but with the patience of a man who knew silence could reveal more than words. Finally, he spoke. "I remember you." Her breath caught. He continued. "I remember sitting in that waiting room, asking for help. And I remember the way you looked at me." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Each word landed with precision, sharp as a scalpel. "You saw me as less deserving of care, less deserving of dignity. And you didn't hesitate to let me know it." Karen's throat tightened. Dr. Hayes, I didn't mean—" He raised a hand, cutting her off. "This isn't about excuses." This is about reality." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "What if I hadn't been me? What if I had been another black man, in pain, dismissed in that moment? What if that patient had gone home, untreated, because the nurse on duty decided his pain wasn't worth her time?" Karen's chest burned, her excuses tangled in her throat, unable to escape. He went on. "Do you know why I became a doctor?" She shook her head faintly, her eyes wide. "Because when I was 12, my father died in a waiting room. Dismissed, ignored, written off as dramatic until it was too late. That wound never left me. And every time I step into a hospital, I remember what that dismissal cost me." His words hung in the air like a blade suspended above her. Steady, unyielding. Karen swallowed hard, her voice breaking. I was wrong." For the first time since she'd entered, his expression shifted. Not soft, but searching. "Wrong isn't enough, Ms. Whitfield. Wrong has consequences, for patients, for families, for lives." She lowered her eyes to her lap, shame burning through her. Silence fell again. But this silence was heavier, because now she wasn't just being confronted, she was being measured. Finally, Malcolm leaned back, his voice lower but no less firm. "You'll keep your position. For now. But under me, this hospital will change. Dismissal, bias, contempt, they end here." Today, Karen's eyes flicked up at him, searching for anger, for cruelty. But all she found was resolve, and that cut deeper than rage ever could. He finished quietly. "Do better, Miss Whitfield. Because next time, it may not be me sitting in that chair. And next time, your words might cost someone their life." Her chest ached with the truth of it. Her hands trembled around her clipboard. She nodded slowly. "Yes, Dr. Hayes." He studied her for another moment, then gave a small nod. "Dismissed." She rose, her legs unsteady, and turned toward the door. Each step felt like carrying the weight of her own judgment. And as she left the office, one thought echoed louder than any other. This wasn't just about her career. This was about who she was, and who she would choose to be from this day forward. Karen walked out of the office, the door clicking shut behind her. For a moment, she stood in the hallway, her back pressed against the wall, clipboard clutched to her chest. Her breath came shallow, her pulse racing. She felt exposed. Not because anyone was watching her, but because Malcolm's words had stripped away every defense she thought she had. "Do better." The phrase echoed in her mind like a bell tolling in an empty church. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She moved from patient to patient, but for the first time, her hands trembled not from exhaustion, but from awareness. Every face she saw looked different now. Not just charts, not just names. People, each one carrying a story she couldn't afford to ignore. That evening, as she walked through the ward, she noticed a young man in the corner bed. His skin was pale, his expression tight with pain. His chart listed his symptoms, but when she approached, he whispered, "I don't think anyone's listening to me." For a second, the old Karen stirred. The part of her that would have brushed him off, moved quickly to the next bed. But something inside stopped her. Malcolm's voice, his story, his father. She pulled up a chair instead. "I'm listening," she said softly. "Tell me everything." The boy's eyes widened, relief flickering across his face, and in that moment she realized. This was the first time she had truly meant those words. The next morning, the staff gathered again in the conference room. Malcolm stood at the front, reviewing schedules, outlining new protocols, speaking with the calm authority of a man who knew where he was leading them. Karen sat in her chair, quieter than usual, her notepad filled this time with more than scribbles. She wrote down every word, not out of fear, but out of resolve. Nurse Jordan Ellis, seated beside her, glanced at her notes, then at her face. Something in her demeanor was different, less hardened, less dismissive, almost open. When the meeting ended, Karen didn't rush out. Instead, she approached Malcolm as the room emptied. He looked up at her, patient but guarded. "Miss Whitfield." She steadied herself, then spoke. "I owe you more than an apology, but I'll start there." Her voice didn't shake this time. "I was wrong. About you, about the way I see patients, about the way I treat people. I can't erase what I said, but I can change what I do next." For the first time, Malcolm's expression softened. Not into a smile, but into something closer to understanding. "That's a start," he said quietly. She nodded. A weight lifted, not gone, but lighter, because now she carried it with the intention to be better. Weeks later, the hospital began to feel different. Patients noticed. Families noticed. Even staff began to whisper about the shift. Rushed dismissals turned into longer conversations. Charts became more than paperwork. The waiting room felt less like a place of dread and more like a doorway to care. And at the heart of it all was Dr. Malcolm Hayes. Not because he demanded perfection, but because he demanded humanity. One evening, as Malcolm walked the corridor, he passed Karen speaking with an elderly patient. She crouched to his level, her tone gentle, her patience unwavering. Malcolm paused for a moment, watching quietly. Then, satisfied, he moved on. He didn't need to say anything. The change was already happening, and it would outlive any single conversation. Later, in the stillness of his office, Malcolm sat by the window, the city lights glowing beyond the glass. He thought of his father, of the waiting room where he had been dismissed, of the promise he had made to himself as a boy. And now, sitting in the chair of head surgeon, he realized that promise was alive. Every word, every lesson, every patient cared for with dignity was a piece of justice stitched back into the world. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "This is for you, Dad." And with that, he returned to his work. Because for Dr. Malcolm Hayes, the mission was never about revenge. It was about healing the patients who came through those doors, and healing the wounds left by every voice that once said, "You don't matter." Under his leadership, those voices would never win again. Were you inspired by Dr. Malcolm Hayes' determination and leadership? Click the subscribe button. There are many more inspiring stories and more to come.